What's something creepy that has happened to you that you still occasionally think about to this day? My dad told me to rake some leaves in our front yard when I was like 12. I ended up working for a few minutes, then felt eyes on me. You know the feeling. I turned around and my neighbor across the street was taking pictures of me so obviously. Right when he saw me, he put his phone down and turned around. I immediately ran inside and told my family. None of them believed me. I'm 18 now and he's still my neighbor and I have been creeped out ever since. I have to close my window blinds all the time still because I always feel like he's watching me. I was like 13 at the time and I was on a trip to DC. We had stopped and I went into the public bathroom. It was empty and I went to the urinal at the complete end of the room. Then, halfway through my piss, this big middle-aged guy who looked like he just butchered a group of children walks in and goes to the urinals. There was about a dozen urinals open besides mine, and this dude chooses the one a few over from me. He then glances over at me a few times, and then promptly switches over to the stall right next to me. He skipped over 2 whole urinals, just to get the one next to me. Thankfully I finished right as he did this, and I sped right the F out to there. I didn't even wash my hands. Pretty sure that was the closest I've ever been to being molested. Used to dispatch/call take 911 in a moderately sized city. Was working overnights once, and we started getting tons of calls about UFOs over the area. It was a weeknight in summer, and lots of people out walking or drinking, or whatever were seeing this thing. We probably took 100-ish calls about M. For reference, I might handle 300 or 400 calls myself on a shift, and as a supervisor that rotation, I took over trying to resolve it so everybody could focus on the typical stuff. We had a hot phone to the airport ATC for air emergencies. Got to use that once for a plane crash. That was fucking terrifying, and they had absolutely no idea about what was going on and actively resisted getting involved. Little while later, got a hold of an FAA hotline and they definitely had a UFO policy, but were only interested in taking info. They didn't disseminate anything. Talking to them felt like an interrogation, and I left my badge number instead of my name. Eventually got a hold of a duty officer at an Air Force base relatively close by. He told me they were aware of the situation, they were monitoring it, and to consider it a closed issue. Whole thing was a trip. Definitely got vibes like I was an extra in the opening of Independence Day. This was before the days of neighborhood Facebook groups or Yik Yak. The local radio stations had tons of pictures up on their websites for a while afterwards. When I was in the early years of secondary school, probably 12, 14-ish, my mum asked me to take a bag of suja over to my elderly neighbor's house as she lent us some sugar the previous weekend. Being a bit bratty, I didn't want to take it as I didn't feel like interacting with anyone. But I took it anyway, stood at my neighbor's front door, timber frame, frosted glass panel in the middle, and knocked. Saw her walking down the hallway to the door, and decided that I really didn't feel like chatting. So rude of me, but anyway. So I put the bag of sugar on the doorstep and legged it back to my house. Obviously didn't say anything to my mum about leaving without talking to the neighbor. 3 days later, my neighbor pops round to our house and asks if we noticed anything strange around her house in the last couple of days. Naturally my mum says her honeybee went and dropped the sugar to you. I thought you'd have spoken then. So I was caught out and had to explain that I'd rudely dropped the sugar and essentially ding dong, ditched. Neighbor goes on to explain that 3 days ago her alarm was triggered and her house was robbed. She had been interstate and forgot to let us know. It wasn't her walking down the hallway to the front door, but the people burgling her home. Sometimes your intuition speaks to you in weird ways, but that day I just did not want to talk to anyone, and I still think about how lucky I am that I bailed when I saw that figure walking down the hallway. Who knows what could have happened. When I was around 13 over 14 I was home alone, upstairs, when I heard somebody busting open the kitchen door yelling fire fire get out. I didn't smell anything, nor did I think that there was that could ignite a fire. I had ordered takeout and all the things that could set a fire were off, so I decided not to get out and called 911 explaining everything. The police came and found muddy footprints in the kitchen, along with the kitchen door busted. When I was a kid, maybe 10 or so, I was home by myself. Pretty normal since I was a latchkey kid. I was just hanging out and shooting a cardboard box with one of those cheap airsoft guns you have to rack every time you shoot. I hear a knock at the door and see a bald man through the peephole. It seemed like he was looking through it and saw me. Being a stupid kid that thought adults could get me in trouble. Do not teach your kids that. I opened the door. He said he had a leak in his apartment downstairs and came inside to look for a plant or some reason for a leak I was sketched out, and being a kid I thought maybe I should shoot him with my dinky little plastic welder and run. He said something along the lines of "Huh, that's weird," turned around to see a little boy with his hand around a pistol grip at his waist. That guy got the hell out of there. Nearly spun out on the hardwood. That was the day I either stopped a weirdo from breaking into my apartment, or the day I made my downstairs neighbor think the weird kid upstairs will shoot him. When I was little, I was sleeping over at my friend's house. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, dark/far end of the hallway, away from her room. When I stepped out of the bathroom, her older brother was standing outside the door, in the dark. He never said a word, just walked up to me silently and put his hands around my neck. Someone stirred and he dropped his hands. I immediately called my mom and left without even saying anything. Friend never believed me and I never went back. When my friend and I were 17, we used to work in a Pizza Hut together. We were closing up one weekend, so it was about 11 PM by the time we shut down and were ready to lock up. When we walked out to her car, there was an old lady sitting in her front passenger seat. My friend opened the driver door and asked the old lady before getting in, "Can I help you?" The old lady said, "I just need a ride home." So we tell her that we just have to go back inside and call our moms to tell her we'll be late. We go back inside the store and lock the door and call the police. Within 10 minutes the police are there arresting her. Turns out it was actually a 47-year-old man dressed up as an old lady. They found drugs and a knife on his body. My mum used to start at work at like 3 AM and she was up at about 2:30 having her coffee. I heard her up and went to see her. She joked that she heard something outside and me being a bit silly opened the blinds up wide as a joke and there was a guy just standing there staring into the lounge room. That was creepy enough as it is, but what sticks with me is the fact he didn't run or really react for what felt an eternity. While I ran to get my old man and brother, apparently he just stood there and then slowly walked off. In my teens and early 20s, my best friend and I used to have lots of sleepovers. His mom worked the night shift as a nurse and his little brother usually stayed in his room and went to bed early, so we had the house for ourselves. We'd cook/eat dinner together, watch TV and especially talk a lot. We also had a tradition that we called night walks. Always around 11 PM or midnight, we'd leave the house and go for a long walk, 2 to 3 hours. It was especially nice in the summer because the air was warm, but there was a coolish breeze and the fields and pastures smelled amazing. There was one particular route we walked very often. Towards the end of it, there was a big forest that we had to cross, and when we emerged from it, we were on a hill that overlooked the city. There was a bench and sometimes we sat down to enjoy the silence, the distant lights and to relax a bit before going downhill and home again. One time we did exactly this. Walking through the forest was always a bit scary in the middle of the night, so once we got out, my friend suggested to rest on that bench for a few minutes. We left the trail, walked 20 meters across a meadow, and finally got to the bench. The bench was located in a place where it was surrounded by trees and bushes, except in the front, where you had a great view. We sat there for maybe 20 to 25 minutes, had a smoke and just talked about random stuff like space and philosophy. At one point my friend remarked that he was getting cold because this happened in late fall, October or November. So we decided to get going and walk home again. When we were almost back to the trail, my friend asked me if I had brought the lighter. I told him that I thought he had picked it up. We turned around and went back to the bench. For a while we just kind of touched around on the wooden surface, but couldn't find it. Since this spot was mostly surrounded by trees, it was very dark. My friend took out his phone and turned on the flashlight to find the lighter. He waved the flashlight around, and that's when we saw him. There was a guy sitting right behind the bench. Like, maybe 2 meters, 6 feet. He was completely dressed in black and sat there, motionless, on the cold, wet ground just staring at us. We hadn't heard any noise, which means he must have sat there for the entire time, while we were sitting on the bench. Just staring at the back of our heads. That alone is super creepy to think about still today. Of course my friend and I both got really startled, and my friend said something like, "Holy shit man, you almost gave us a heart attack, haha. What the hell are you doing there?" But the guy didn't respond anything. For a while we just stared at him confused, and he stared back at us. Then I asked, "Why are you sitting there on the ground?" No response. My friend asked, are you alright?" Still no response. It was a really surreal situation, but something about it didn't feel good. I can't say what, but something about that guy gave me a really bad feeling in my stomach. My friend later told me that he had felt the same way. Suddenly, the guy got up and began to walk towards us. I said, what's happening?" And now the guy answered, but all he said was, "Yeah." As he walked around the bench to come towards us, I felt my friend's hand grab my coat and pull me backwards. He quietly said, "Let's get the fuck out of here, man." We walked a few steps backwards because we didn't want to turn our back on the guy. Then we turned around, ran back to the trail and another 100 meters. When we turned around, we were relieved to see the guy hadn't come after us, but we still walked home as quickly as possible. To this day I don't know why the hell that guy was sitting there, who he was, why he was silently staring at us for almost half an hour, what he planned to do when he got up and walked towards us, etc. All I can say is that my gut feeling tells me it was the right decision to run away rather than wait to find out. 2 days after I was assaulted by a man, someone left flowers on my doorstep without a note. If it was him, he knows where I live. When I was a child I was playing out in the front yard of my house when a white van pulled up on the road, the sliding door opened, and a guy in his early 20s waved at me to go over to him. Luckily I was a shy kid and got scared and ran inside and told my parents about a strange man in a van calling me over. My parents raced outside, but the van was gone by then, and it was only as an adult I think back, and I realize what a serious situation that was. I could have been abducted that day and worse. When I was maybe 10 I was over at a friend's house hanging out. Her neighbor was out of town and my friend was feeding the cat while they were gone. So my friend and I went over to feed the cat. Immediately upon opening the door, we heard someone walking upstairs. They were loud, heavy, slow footsteps, like didn't even sound human. My friend and I just looked at each other and sprinted back to her house. The worst part was we told her mom and the mom didn't believe us and made us go back and finish feeding the cat alone. We were terrified but did it. When the neighbor came back, they found that their house had been broken into. Thanks for watching and share your stories. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.